Welcome, everyone. So today we have the Early Career Researcher Group, the ECR, as part of the US Hooper Committee, having the first webinar session of the year after the conference. And today we are delighted to have a panel of 4 outstanding speakers to give their perspectives on mentoring and receiving mentorship. So we would be so this session would be 1 hour. So it would be about 5 to 7 minutes of talks from each of our esteemed panelists, and we would have about 30 to 40 minutes of question time. So each speaker would present their slides, and after the 4th speaker, we would open the room to questions from the audience, and hopefully we would have a nice interactive session. So with that said, I now present Amanda Lorentzen, one of our senior ECR members, to go ahead and introduce our first speaker for the webinar.
Saeed. As Saeed mentioned, we're really excited to hear from our speakers today, so we'll go ahead and get started with our first speaker, Dr. Brigitte Schilling. Dr. Schilling works at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging in San Francisco Bay Area since 2000, where she leads her own laboratory as a professor. She's also the director of Mass Spectrometry Technology Center. She received her PhD in Germany and completed her postdoctoral work at UCSF, and her research at the Buck Institute focuses on translational research aimed at improving human aging and treating age-related diseases such as neurodegeneration, osteoarthritis, and cancer. And they use modern proteomic technologies to investigate mechanisms of aging, senescence, and cancer to develop potential new biomarkers and therapeutic targets. So she also is the president of US HUPO, and we're really excited to have her here today and share her thoughts on mentoring.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda. Yeah, so I'm past president now, so I gave over to John now. So, but yeah, thank you so much for having me. I will share my slides, and it's such an honor to work with the ECR of US HUPO. So thank you for enabling the day today. And thank you for this very nice introduction. So yeah, this is the Buck Institute. We're in north of San Francisco. It's a really nice place if anybody ever wants to come by. It is very interesting to think about your career as an academic, say, professor in my case, right? So I have in the past thought a lot about my own research, and I have this one slide here showing a few things that Amanda kind of summarized earlier, right? Neurodegeneration, osteoarthritis, cancer, ovarian aging, senescence, and kidney disease. And so a lot of my day is, of course, working with the science that my lab has dedicated to. But it is actually kind of interesting because there's so much more in my professional work beyond the science. And that's actually maybe something that I didn't really anticipate all the way when I was maybe a young postdoc or graduate student. I mean, I always knew I would have my science and my laboratory, and then I've always wanted to work with instrumentation and with vendors. But one really important part of leading a lab has really become working with lab members and other mentees. And mentoring is actually quite a broad term because really I mentor a lot of people. And so, I mean, obviously my own lab members, but also a lot of other lab members here, from other groups. At the Buck Institute, everything is very collaborative, and I'm co-mentor to many other postdocs and students. But I also mentor some younger investigators or even other people at other career stages. I do mentor when I teach, and I teach as part of a graduate program we have. And also, I was part of the US HUPO leadership when we introduced the ECR at the time and implemented this wonderful group. And now you're running everything yourself. So, there's also mentoring as part of that. And then actually, I have a couple of activities as part of a foundation where we actually provide fellowships to more senior postdocs who then become research scientists. So mentoring is all over the place. But there's also mentoring like from peer to peer, right, with other professors. And in fact, I am mentored every day throughout life and career. And sometimes this is directly and sometimes it's indirectly. But so I think it's a really important part in our lives. And I really enjoy this. And so it's actually quite a joy to work with young people and help them in their career and life stages and also their goals. So this is actually my lab, and you can see me here in the middle. And it's really interesting when you have a lab. Often there are quite a lot of different people in the lab. What I mean with that is different career levels. So for example, in my lab, I have an associate director for my proteomics core, Dr. Christina King. I have staff and research scientists. So that is here Mark Watson and Joanna Bonds. Then we have postdoctoral fellows. That's Charlie Schurman and Jordan Burton. You have a core on lab manager. That's Sam Shah. She's a research associate 3. I have a project scientist. That's Jacob. And then, you know, you have often students, PhD level students, master students, post-baccalaureate, and then there's temporary people, interns, rotation students, visiting scientists. And it is actually quite interesting to think about because each person requires or needs or would like to get a different type of mentoring, maybe. Maybe for somebody very, very junior, for them it's really important maybe to learn skill sets in the lab, you know, and so each particular career level, I think, has a slightly different type of mentoring that I provide, but also it depends a bit on the, you know, person, what kind of mentoring I give them, right? So some people are very independent. They maybe don't need so much mentoring on the science end, but more on other career aspects but I mean, in the end, everybody does get mentoring, and I'm very interactive and have an open door policy where people can just come and discuss whatever they like. You know, mentoring, thinking about what kind of mentoring do I provide? I try to have projects that have maybe some chance for success. And that is easier said than done. But I mean, I'm trying to give people projects where I'm pretty sure that something will work so that people can have success as part of their scientific work. But then I usually also give them side projects. So if something in the main project is more difficult, they can move over to the side project. I'm trying to enable learning skills. I provide a co-mentor often. This is actually set up at the BUC very easily for that. And I actually enable a lot of conference attendance. And if somebody has a project, I will allow them to go to a conference, and often even international. This is actually really good for the mentees. They can build their own networks and everything. But it's also really good for me because we disseminate the science we do together and the science that my lab brings forward. So often, and I'm coming back to that, things are good for the mentee are often also good for me. I enable other opportunities. I expose my lab members to vendors, other collaborators, for them to build the network, as I said, but also sometimes to philanthropy. And you know, when people do want to, only if they want to, then I may involve them in grant writing. That's maybe a learning skill that's important for a postdoc or a scientist if they maybe would like to start their own lab at some point. If somebody's interested, I may show them how to do an NIH budget. Nobody had ever shown me until I wrote my first grant. And it's actually easy. One just has to have somebody to show you one time. But also I'm trying to provide responsibilities, and I mentioned a few things here, and also maybe interactions with NIH, like one of my scientists, Mark, interacts a lot with NIH as part of a very large grant we have. And I think I allow for some lab members to maybe mentor students or more junior people in the lab or interns. And I try to allow mentees to driving the projects, and then I help them where needed. how do you select a mentee? How do I select a mentee? And I think when I meet with them and interview, I make very clear what my expectations are so that they can decide, do they want to work with me or could they work with me? I think it's very good to be honest about those things in the beginning, so that there's no bad surprises later. And I think I look a little bit for similar values that somebody may have, overall values, like, for example, one big value I have is good quality of data and transparency. I look that somebody has goals. I look that somebody has enthusiasms. I look that people work with precision. They can always learn skills, but these are, like, I feel like ground values I'm looking for when I hire somebody. And sometimes I actually would like somebody to have maybe a unique skill set that I wanted to start having in my lab. Or sometimes I look for somebody who has a skill set maybe to operate an instrument. And sometimes I look for other skill sets. So that's actually also something interesting. How to select a mentor. And I think that's one of the most important things and decisions. Questions one can ask oneself there is, for example, can this person, meaning the mentor, can I provide a good environment? Can I provide good resources? Can I provide skills that would be helpful for the person, skills to learn? And also, do you get along with the work ethic that the mentor has? And maybe do you get along with the personality that the mentor has? And then as a mentee, one should ask oneself, by working with this mentor, can one further the career, scientific progress, and personal growth? And if all of this matches, this can be really great. It can be successful on both sides. And I always say this thing, your success is my success is your success, right? If I get a grant, the lab has more resources to do the fun science. If somebody in my lab gets a poster prize, that's really good for me too, right? Because our science gets nice exposure. So I think those are kind of the thoughts I had for today. And then we actually do a lot of fun things together also. This was a recent picture we did in 2020 here. But the slide that had that picture had also my parents on the slide. So I wanted to share this also. And I wanted to actually say that for me, my mentees, they're very important to me. And it's almost like, I really care about their success and wellness. And it's almost like a little family as a lab. So anyway, thank you again for having me today. And I hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. That was such a great way to start off, and really interesting to hear about how it's important to think about the different types of mentorship you need at different points in your life.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Jay Forsyth. Dr. Jay Forsyth is an associate professor of chemistry and biochemistry at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. He earned his BS in chemistry from the Furman University in 2009 and his PhD from Vanderbilt University in 2014, focusing on ion mobility and imaging mass spectrometry. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Georgia Tech, studying peptide evolution, and his current research explores detecting chemical signatures of life and how extraterrestrial life might differ from life on Earth, which just sounds so interesting. And he's also mentored 17 undergraduate researchers and 3 visiting researchers from Germany. So he has lots of great experience in mentoring, and we're happy to hear some of his tips.
All right, thank you, Amanda. Let me share my screen real quick. Let's see. Okay, thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. So I'm gonna go in reverse a little bit since it's a short talk. So as Amanda said, I work at a College of Charleston, which is a primarily undergraduate university. We have about 10,000 students, 9,000 of whom are bachelor students, right? So pretty much all the research students in my lab are either bachelor students, or we have an exchange program with a school in Germany, as she mentioned. So we've had a few German students. I have one now. I really think early career stuff is great. It feels like yesterday, like I was a postdoc thinking about, like my next step in my career, and all of a sudden now I've been here 8 years, and I've had like 20 research students in my lab, and it's crazy how time flies, and you like become on the other side of things. And I just want to say thank you to my students. I have some pictures of them presenting and doing stuff. I get a lot from mentoring them. I learn just as much from them as they learn from me. Maybe I learn more from them than they learn from me. I don't know. You have to ask them, but I'm always learning, and I feel like mentorship is like a lifelong process, um, as was just discussed. I completely agree with that. I want to talk a little bit about what life is like at an undergraduate institution, what it's like to mentor. So, pretty much all the research students in my lab, like my lab is the first lab they've worked in, right? And so, that comes with that's really fun, but it comes with a lot of responsibilities. First and foremost, I need to make sure that we instill a culture of safety in the lab, right? I want the students to feel welcomed and included. I want them to be able to be themselves when they're in the lab. And I work at a liberal arts school. I want them to learn not just chemistry or not just mass spectrometry. I want them to learn other things too in their other classes and see how things overlap and connect with each other. I love, one of my favorite things about where I work is the enthusiasm and curiosity of the students. That drives me. That keeps me going, and that's just amazing. I love that. My job is to provide direct hands-on training. Like, I teach my students directly in the lab. Like, I don't have postdocs or anything like that. I'm the one teaching them how to run the instrument. I'm the one teaching them sample prep. I'm the one teaching them how to analyze the data, and I try to provide opportunities for them to publish. Sometimes while they're still here, sometimes after they've left, if they're in medical school or graduate school. But better late than never. I do really try to take them to conferences. As was mentioned previously, I think that's super important. And then I try to help them on to the next step. Some of them go on to PhD, some of them go on to pharmacy school, some of them go into medical school, some go straight into industry. Some will do like a master's and go into industry. Like, they do different kinds of things from here on. And I'm just excited to be a little part of that journey, right? Some challenges of working at an undergraduate institution. So some of you may have attended one in the past. Some of you may not have. So it's definitely a different environment than like a big research university. Teaching and research are equally valued where I work, right? So a lot of places, like, that's not true at all, right? And so a lot of places research is way more important. And so I teach 3 classes every semester. That's kind of a lot. When I grade everything myself. I don't have teaching assistants or anything like that, right? I also teach the labs. So again, I'm teaching the students I'm teaching them how to pipette. I'm teaching them how to use a balance. I'm teaching them how to do a titration. I'm teaching them how to make a buffer, like all that kind of stuff. And so it's very hands-on, which I like, but it takes a lot of time. Limited institutional capacity, right? So I think this is probably true, like wearing multiple hats each day of every job, but we don't have a lot of like institutional infrastructure for things like big grants, or like when I travel, like I have to do all the planning myself. Like students come to my office crying because they failed a test, like all kinds of things, right? And so you wear a lot of hats every day in this job, but I really like that. And you're always interacting with the students a lot. And then like limited startup funds, right? So different undergraduate institutions have different degrees of startup funding. Like some of the smaller, like small liberal arts colleges with big endowments, some of them actually have decent startup packages. Mine is like a public PUI, so it's kind of in between. And like I couldn't afford a brand new like mass spec when I started, so I bought this like old Voyager. I don't know if any of you have used one of those before. There's really not many of them out around anymore. And I just got a new one, but I kind of had to use an older instrument for a while. So there definitely are some limitations of working with at an undergraduate institution, but I find it really rewarding. And then kind of going back to the beginning, I want to talk a little bit about my mentors. Some of my official mentors and some of my unofficial mentors. I did my undergrad at Furman University, and I worked for John and Sandy Wheeler, who are still there. I just saw them last summer, actually, and gave a talk there. That was really fun. We have a very close relationship still. I did my PhD with John McLean at Vanderbilt. Choosing John's lab was one of the best career decisions I've ever made. He was a really young professor at the time when I joined his group. Obviously, he's very successful now. but like I was, I was debating, which group to join when I got to graduate school, and I just felt like he was going to advocate for me as a student, which he did 100-fold, and he continues to do that to this day. I actually my first 8 years ago, my first day as a professor, he called my office because he saw my telephone number in my email, and he called it and said, "Hey, professor," and that was really meaningful to me. Facundo, my postdoc advisor, he and I are still very close. We had I think the relationship between a postdoc and a PI is maybe a little different than a PhD student and a PI. I always felt like Facundo treated me as an equal, even though I didn't really see us as equals. I still don't really see us as equals. And he really valued my opinion, and he gave me a lot of freedom to do cool experiments and try things, fail, try again. And then Pam Riggs Glasgow was my former chair here. She's a dean now at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. She was great, and I learned a lot from her, and I'd be happy to talk about some of that stuff later. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop, and we can move on to the next speaker.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was sorry, just waiting for the video. Yeah. That was wonderful, and I can relate to that because close mentorship with students, especially at undergrad level, those experiences they would cherish, in their next academic adventures. I mean, I did, so I completely relate to that, and I think you're doing an outstanding job. Okay, so with that said, I'm just gonna introduce the next speaker just so that we have enough time for the questions. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Lavender Lin. So with over 10 years in the workforce and more than 5 years in research and 3 years in instruments facility, Dr. Lavender Lin specializes in human proteomics, proteostasis, and aging studies utilizing liquid chromatography coupled with mass spectrometry, as well as megadata analysis. So after her doctoral studies at Brigham Young University, she went on to pursue her postdoctoral studies at BYU, where she is currently focusing on single-cell proteomics. She is experienced in Chinese medicine and has proven success in solving complex problems and bringing projects to completion in the designated timeline. So being recognized for inspiring management that motivates team members and creating work environment that promotes unity and productivity is what she thrives for. And today we're delighted to have her to give her talk and experiences about her journey on mentoring and mentorship. So with that said, I'd like to present you Dr. Lin. I think you're, yeah.
Thank you, Zia, for the very, very nice introduction. And wait, no, did you see my screen?
Looks great.
Okay, it looks great on the slide, right? Great, that's great. No, thank you so much for the invitations, and I'm thrilled to be here. So me, Lavender, and then I just got my PhD back in like 2 years ago in 2022, and at BYU in the Price Lab, and ever since then I moved to another lab at BYU in Dr. Ryan Kesley's lab working on single-cell proteomics. So BYU like is really like Jay's experience. BYU is a undergrad focused research institution, so we have a lot of undergrad, and also because of that, plus like both my PI's trust and support, I'm able to have the privilege to mentor like 28 undergrads in my time here. And this is some of my students, and I just like Jay, like I learned so much from them, and then it's a joy to be with them, a privilege to learn from them. And just one of the things that sparked my life is just seeing them like turn from knowing not a lot in research to very competent researchers, and that is really my joy. So I always tell my student like the more time you're in research, you will gather your own version of horror story to share to the next generation. And so today, just like I think I love to share a story because I always think that is a wonderful way to talk about experience and something there's always a moral lesson. So here we go. And my slide is not moving. I have no idea what happened. Okay, let's. Okay, here we go. Is it moving on your side?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so that was my first summer break as a brand new PhD student, and that's 4 months in the lab. And like just finished all the initial training and like have brief idea about my project. So and my PI came to me, so hey, you're ready. Let's try this amazing reagent. It will move our project forward greatly. And if you cannot recognize like what this reagent by how colorful it is and so many vial, it is TMT. So he told me like, yeah, just go ahead and try it, no pressure. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, wait, that is worth more than my car and everything in my bank account adding together. Like really, no pressures. And like it's 10 plus and we need to label 80 samples in the same time. So 1 month of preparation, a lot of protein digestion. 7 years ago, it is like a lot of time. And so here come the days. I have my protein, like a peptide. I have my protocol. I have reagent. I'm ready with my team. Here we go. We're going for this amazing experience. And of course, we're all very nervous. So, well, after I like the first step, we need to resuspend the TMT reagent in acetonitrile 100%. So I asked my team, hey, can you guys get me like all some LC-MS grade acetonitrile for me? And they did, and we got the reagent, we labeled everything happily. We have a successful morning. And then so I said, great, let's take a break. And because in the afternoon, we're going to do the desalting and then so while they're taking a break, I'm preparing for the next step. I'm just making a 50% acetonitrile for the desalting, like how hard it will be, right? It is 1-to-1 ratio. So I make them and then this is what I see. Like, I don't know if it's clear, but I see 2 layers of liquid. Like, I don't know, I know it should not be that way. So either my acetonitrile has problem or my water have problem. I was really hoping I have just something wrong with my water. So long story short, after investigation, I found out, yes, the problem unfortunately is my acetonitrile. And yes, the team get it from a LCMS acetonitrile stock bottle. However, that bottle is very scrabble, have various different colors of Sharpie on it. And it turned out that was a waste styrofoam container that we're getting acetonitrile from. So this is how I felt at the moment. I'm going to be fired. And then so I did not want to, I really did not want to, but I know I need to break the news to my PI. So I knocked on his door and tell him everything about the experiment, like telling him that yes, pretty much that $3,000 is down to the drain right now. And then it felt like forever for me for the silence, but actually it wasn't now. Immediately his response was, does anybody get hurt? Did anybody get hurt? And that was the moment. That was a very defining moment in my life as a researcher, as a mentor, as a mentee. I care like at that set tone to what a mentor I am, because I want to be like my PI, because I know I can trust this man. I can bring any problem to them, like big or small. I will not be judged. Like I have the room to grow. So this is a very short version of my horror story. Like there's a lot of moral lesson that you actually can learn from this story. Like that's why I use it as my day one material to all my training, my mentee. But just from this moral story, like something that we can learn about mentorship is like some characteristic about mentor and both mentor and mentee is like for mentor, like you have to provide proper training, like, and then you trust your mentee's capability after proper training, because like my PI wasn't watching over my shoulder to make sure I did not ruin that CMP. Probably he hoped that he should, but he did not. And after that tragedy happened, he allowed me that have room that I can make mistake, because as scientists, we all know all the true progress actually come from all the mistakes that we make, and we get better and get better each time. But and then the last things I think that is fundamental as a mentor is caring about the mentee's well-being, like not just about the project. Of course, like I have so many students, then because I need them to help me move the progress forward. But also we really need to care about what their status. So that caring really build a trust, the foundation in a mentorship. I think that's really critical. And as for mentee, like asking questions, communication, and have the ability to try to investigate the situation, taking responsibility and find to be wrong, find to be need to be corrected. I think one of the last things that I really care, I think is very important, is being honest. Like for sure, like being honest to your data. But one of the other things, like you have to be honest to yourself, because you have to be honest to know, admit that what is my status, and then where am I, what I need, then you will be able to find proper guidance from proper resource. So I hope you enjoyed the story a little bit, and thank you again.
I think that was wonderful. I think many of us can relate to that story. I think at one point, all of us have experienced. I have certainly experienced that nightmare scenario, and I think what you mentioned makes a lot of sense. And I think as a mentor, the three key things that is super important is communication, trust, and respect. Otherwise, you know, the mentee will never grow. So, that was a wonderful experience. So, thank you so much, Lynn. I'm going to now introduce our last speaker before the question, and that is Dr. Devin Schweb. His research focuses on the implementation of millisecond informatics to enable intelligent data acquisition strategies. His research group applies these technologies to quantify proteins as a readout for diverse cell states with broad interest spanning microbial protein interactions, small molecular binding events, preclinical proteomics, and profiling primary tissue samples. So he pursued his doctoral work with Dr. Scott Gerber at Dartmouth Medical School, followed by his postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School. Starting in 2020, Devin began his research group at the University of Washington and in the Department of Genomic Studies. So we are delighted to have him join us today to talk about his philosophy and experiences in mentoring and mentorship.
Awesome. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to the discussion afterward. I'll talk a little bit about kind of two general arms of mentorship. First, kind of my journey through mentorship, kind of the summary, and hopefully I'll speed through this to leave plenty of time for questions. So I had a lot of really excellent kind of primary mentors. So as Jay mentioned, my first lab experience was at a liberal arts college in the lab of Lois Banta. Dr. Banta was incredibly supportive, taught me kind of the basics of biochemistry and cell biology, and that ended up being really pivotal for me then joining another faculty there, Chip Levitt lab, who taught me about proteins, and we had some of those an early MALDI to play around with, and namely because of kind of that interaction, I went to graduate school. I was lucky to get into graduate school. I think I applied to 3 schools and I got into 1. So otherwise I might be doing, I don't know, finance or something instead of proteomics because of that. And then I was also lucky enough to kind of join Scott Gerber's lab, and Scott's lab was just starting. So I got experience kind of with a young lab that was getting off the ground and trying to tackle problems and get grants and do all of those things. And Scott was great about kind of letting us participate in that. I then moved to the University of Washington for the first time to work with Jim Bruce out here. I remember I was interviewing with Jim and we were having dinner, and I spilled like I think my glass of, I don't know what, water or something on the ground, and I was like, oh, he's never going to hire me now. But of course he thought nothing of it. But I just remember the heightened anxiety of that moment. And Jim was an outstanding mentor. He kind of gave me all the confidence I needed to go out and start publishing and think about how to structure papers and build big stories, and how to do that with a focus on kind of protein interactions. And then my last kind of primary mentor as I guess a trainee was Steve Gee, and Steve again was great. Steve thinks big and about lots of things simultaneously, so that was intimidating kind of to start, but I found that lab environment to be an incredible place for thinking about big projects and for doing very rigorous kind of studies. And I really appreciated Steve for all his help and his input, and all the work he put into helping train me. I would also mention, I think, just like Birgit kind of hinted at, and Jay and Lavender, this idea that I had a lot of additional mentors. So when I was at Williams, Natalie Au and Dr. Tom essentially were co-mentors for me while I was there. They were super helpful for having kind of a more informal conversation. I learned kind of the power of what Birgit suggested, right? Peer mentorship, to talk to other folks in lab. Armenia Kettenbach was a postdoc with me and her when I was a graduate student in Scott's lab, and I would argue that she taught me cell biology more than just about anyone else. Everything from mutagenesis through to cell imaging, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was, again, really lucky to have Armenia there at the same time that I was there, doing a lot of work and able to collaborate with her. And then I had a similar situation in Jim's lab with Juan Chavez, who was a senior postdoc when I joined, and then a research scientist there. And again, he was there to answer all my questions, and then we formed a really fun partnership to publish a lot of papers together over the time there. And I also had some outside mentorship there, or here in the University of Washington, from Bill Noble, who was kind of my other faculty mentor to go to and ask questions about computational proteomics. And so again, I was really lucky to have more than one kind of proteomics faculty here. In Steve's lab, two of the kind of drivers and senior scientists there that really helped me out a lot were Ed Hutlin and Joao Paulo. And I think it was really important to go there, and Steve's got a big lab, so having kind of two lampposts or landmarks of folks who know their stuff and are really good and humble and helpful was a huge boon for me in that transition. Of course, in starting my own lab, again, as kind of Birgit hinted at, I have continued to have kind of these senior mentors here, Mike McCost, Judith Bien, Jim again, and Bill. And so that's been a huge boon. And I think a big thing about something Jay mentioned about the continuity, mentorship is kind of a continual process, or something that you do throughout your life or throughout your career, is that I try and essentially model the best practices I do in my lab off what they did, and try and learn as much as I can from them and now my current mentors. And I think that's, well, we'll see. Hopefully you can talk to the folks in the lab and we'll see how that's going. Keys for me, I would say, were early on goal setting. So I think one of the biggest things that helped me figure out what labs I wanted to go to and what I wanted to do were, I kind of came out of grad school with a chip on my shoulder because I only had, quote, only had one first author paper, and I wanted to kind of prove myself. I didn't really know much computational proteomics, and so I wanted to prove myself there too. And that set my goals for me. And those skills were things that then Jim and Steve really helped me develop. So writing papers and computational proteomics, and really grateful for them because they allowed enough flexibility, which I think is a key on the next slide, to be able to do that. I hope through, I don't know, I mentioned it probably 10 times. I was lucky and stubborn. I think those are two important qualities of mentorship and mentee kind of relationship. So you can guide that luck a little bit, again, as Birgit kind of hinted at. So finding people you get along with is a really huge step to that, that you want to take advice with, that you can share where you're at and not feel judged, but feel like you're going to build something really great. But I was inherently lucky to have really good mentors and positions in places I wanted to be at the times I wanted to be them, and stubborn enough to wait sometimes to find those positions. And I think one thing that was key for me too is just this idea of self-advocacy. So learning at some point to have confidence that my ideas might be useful, and that took a long time. I still have issues with that. It's the imposter syndrome is a classic thing. Last but not least was just I would say learning how to make good presentations, and that and the self-advocacy kind of flux together. So the better my presentations became, the more I believed in myself out in the world. Again, lifelong kind of impact. So I have an evolving philosophy on mentorship, just as everyone else has kind of hinted at. I have a really fun group. We just actually added Catherine, just joined officially yesterday, so that was pretty exciting as a graduate student, but we have a mix of research scientists and undergrads and graduate students and postdocs, and they all work together really well. And I think that teamwork and aspect is key to this. My goals kind of as a mentor are, again, to enable that goal setting that I found so important. So we use kind of tools for this, like individual development plans. And I have a strong belief that flexibility is important. So I think that mostly echoes things that Birgit said, right? That the importance of that. We try and set clear expectations, so lab meetings and handbooks. And I think a really important aspect of this is instilling agency in folks in lab. So it's your projects. What do they want to do next, right? And part of that agency is also sharing with folks in lab where the lab is kind of at and where our funding is at, what papers are coming out, what our goals are for kind of the next year overall, so that they can see how their projects fit into that scope. And then along with that is trying to identify areas for growth for folks, opportunities to enable networking. I think one thing I really appreciated about Steve and his mentorship was if we went to a conference and you were talking with Steve and someone else came up, he would immediately introduce you to that person and make sure that you knew them. And that was such a little thing, but is so important because then it expands your network. So again, one of those little things that I try and take. And then, of course, the continuity of this process. So just figuring out ways to show up and interact and ways to continually do better. So I'll stop there.
You, Dr. Schweppe. It was really nice to hear your perspective, and I like your motto of trying to practice what you preach, sort of, and moving on with following up with the best practices that you learned and passing those on to other people. So at this point, I'd like to thank all 4 of our speakers. We have some time for questions, and if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll help get those questions answered. We have a great question to start off with from Daniel, and he's asking, how can you as a mentor fix problems and the relationship when a mentee has made mistakes and lost your trust? I think this is a great question.
Or maybe I could say something. Yeah, I think that we had a nice example earlier from Lavender. I think losing trust, you invest in your people, right? You don't just lose trust just because they make one mistake. So I think that is, first of all, something. And I also think there are different types of mistakes. So, if somebody makes like a mistake that happens to all of us, one drops something, or, that's, never the end of the world. But there are differences also where maybe if somebody is really not as good in lab work, maybe then I try to redirect their efforts a little bit, maybe towards more other skills like computational or helping out in the lab in other ways, for example. But then, of course, there are also like maybe mistakes that are a little bit more malicious or careless. And that is actually more serious. And then I think one can work with the person. And as long as they recognize that, and that we, again, as Devin said, again, we make clear expectations, right? Or how can I fix this, right? So that there's openness from both ends. But I mean, again, these are people one has invested in, right? Like, I mean, it's not like all of a sudden they lose my trust. I mean, I don't think anybody has ever lost trust, right? Like, one has to just find ways to get over something, put it to the side, and improve for the future. And yeah, I think that's my personal view.
Yeah.
I think Lavender had a follow-up to that.
Go ahead,
What
Lavender.
Bridget said is really good. Like there's so many different mistakes, and for me is some mistake that have to be tell them very clearly what is the consequences. Like for me, the very big thing is being honesty. Like if like so I tell all my students in day one, like just I don't mind they are scared of me, but in day one I tell them any dishonesty I found will result in immediately dismissal from the group. Just like there's no chance that they have to know how serious is that mistake, and it's like they will not do that. But as like there's some other mistake as like directing, but it's something also I think communication about a mistake is also very important, because sometimes the mistake is like they actually did not know that happened. But very easily as a researcher, we care our project, and then like they did not know that, and then it's just a double not trust there. I'm not trusting you, but like in the same time, the man is like, I don't know what are you talking about. So I think like really clear communication about a mistake and set plan for overcoming that mistake is very helpful for me.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, I mean, I typically don't encounter more like moral mistakes like in research, like working with undergraduates, there is a little bit less pressure to publish and get big grants, to be honest. And so like I tell my students, like I'm like, if you make a mistake, it's not a problem, right? Let's just figure out what happened, and we'll do better the next time. Where I do encounter this sometimes is actually teaching, right? So students will cheat on stuff, right? And in those cases, I try to structure my courses even in such a way where like I'm not biasing positively or negatively against certain students, right? So, like if I catch a student cheating, like I'll tell them, like this is not acceptable. These are the consequences. But like on your next test, if you get 100 and you do it right, you get 100, right? I'm gonna be fair to them. But like, I mean, there are short-term and there are long-term consequences when they make, bad decisions. But also too, I mean, like my students are 18 to 22-year-olds, not always, but usually, right? And so, there are a lot of good people who have made a lot of dumb decisions when they were 18 to 22. And so I try to just keep that in mind also, like, and I like think about what I was like when I was that age. And, some decisions have very serious consequences, and some have, serious-ish consequences where, it matters, but it's not something that will like ruin their academic career, And so I have to use my judgment there, when you encounter those situations. Yeah.
Devin, do you have any insights, or should I move on to the next questions?
I mean, I think that nicely summarized. I think it's addressing it early and often is super important. I think that follows with what kind of Jay said, is you have to discuss it and either figure out a way over it or through it, or figure out a solution for it. But it's not going to happen if you ignore it.
So our next question is from Lindsay Pino. And I think this is an interesting one, which pretty much falls in with experiences with Dr. Lin from her presentation. So any tips or mistakes on how to facilitate or otherwise encourage peer or co-mentorship amongst your mentees or direct reports? Do you want to start us off?
Oh, okay. I think like very like at the start of my career, like I just like the first day my PI gave me to undergrad when I'm in the lab. And like just that responsibility is kind of already there, I think that is how my PI encouraged like my mentorship on the mentee, like that he really care about we can have the experience to be a leader and to manage a project. So like on day one. And then like some people are very scared of that and some people are fine. Like I think I'm more on the I'm okay with that side. But the other things I think is, and I think from my perspective and experience, like you have to give a period of time knowing your mentee's characteristic. Like some people are really good, like just spot on. They're a leader, they can mentor some people. You need some time and some training on how to be a mentor, how to guide the students. So right now, like I have mentee student in different stage, and actually I don't do the first-hand training anymore because I have very amazing student. I told them, well, no, like now you can do it. I trust you. And I think also like tell them you trust them is very important so they can know, okay, I'm actually can train people and then encourage them. And that's how I try to facilitate that just on my mentee.
Would follow that, but I think it's nice. I like paired approaches or team approaches to like put some senior folks and junior folks together to work on projects. And I think that inherently facilitate because someone comes in with maybe more cell bio and someone comes in with more mass spec and they help each other. And that's a good driver. And then also we have a little fund for going out to coffee for folks. And I try and tell people to go do that. Hopefully it makes more informal kind of conversations.
Yeah, actually, I have a similar strategy where I often match up people for projects, right? And they can often be where one person mentors the other or where they just work in it together. But then in the end, they still kind of co-mentor each other somewhat. But I mean, for example, for like very junior lab members, I would actually not even have the time anymore to really teach them like skills at the bench, right? So there, I really actually rely on, say, some more senior postdocs that they take over that role. But the understanding remains that they in the end still report to me, right? So we have a system where maybe the postdoc mentors them or the project scientist mentors somebody, but the mentee, they write a little, write up what did I do this week to me on Fridays, and we continue to talk, of course, all the time. But I mean, that's a nice system to give somebody else responsibility in mentoring, but at the same time, I know at all times what's happening kind of, and then for the person to write up a little Friday report is also kind of nice. They kind of sometimes see, wow, I did so much this week, or they see, this took a lot longer than I thought. So I actually think it's a learning experience.
Great, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next section, but these answers are all so helpful. We have a question here from Lola, and it's a bit of a tough question. I'm interested to hear the answer. How have you as a mentor or mentee navigated working towards being more independent without standing the risk of appearing to disregard your mentor, especially if you have some new ideas that might differ from something your mentor is suggesting?
Oh, I could answer that. I think this comes where it's so important how you choose your mentor, right? Those are things one could discuss early on, say in an interview. I mean, you must have the trust that the mentor allows you to have your own ideas, right? But at the same time, I don't think independence and respect are exclusive. They need to be both there. I mean, I think one should always respect each other. Every lab member respects every other lab member, and that includes me and the student and everybody. So there must always be respect. But it also allows for people to voice their opinion or what they really want to do, and then they know I would potentially and most likely allow that.
Yeah, I had an experience when I was an early postdoc in Facuno's lab at Georgia Tech, where like it was clear that Facundo hired me to work on this big collaborative project, and they needed like some of the training I had as a PhD student on that project, right? And when I started working on it, I started realizing, oh, I could take this in this really fun direction, that I would love to do this, right? And so, but but I also realized I had to like fulfill my obligation to the project. I needed to do what they needed me to do first, and then I can do this side project, right? And so I feel like I kind of like showed them that like, hey, I can contribute and provide what you need here. And then once I kind of proved that, I have more like freedom and leeway to like go explore my own things. And so like a lot of the times we're juggling multiple things at the same time. And so, still being able to like fulfill your obligation to your advisor and to your team, can kind of earn you some leeway down the road, I think. Yeah.
Right. So for the next question, so we had a question. Devin wrote a very detailed explanation in the onset, and that was a question from Ellie to how to best prepare as a mentee to transition from being an undergrad to being a postdoc. So the next question that we have is from Chad, and his question is how to best leverage the skills of your undergraduates, as well as how do you build up trust with your undergrads and make working with them mutually beneficial? So I think, Jay, you're probably the best person to answer this question right now.
Yeah, well, I can start at the end first. So thinking about like working with students, making it mutually beneficial. As was mentioned earlier, I think at different career stages that looks different. But with me, at least with undergraduate students, like I can't expect them to come in and just like start churning out papers. That's not really how my job works, right? And so if they get a paper before they graduate, that's amazing, but that's not a normal occurrence, right? And so when they published, usually they have like already been in graduate school a year or two, and like it's the projects we were working on the project for 4 or 5 years, right? And so I will say that my institution values me mentoring them, right? And so like on my annual evaluations, like when the students present at a conference, or even if they present like on campus, things like that, like that looks good for me. And so even that degree is somewhat mutually beneficial, even if we haven't published yet. In terms of what was the rest of the question? Like how do I leverage their skills? I try to choose projects that I think are both interesting and also feasible, right? Feasible for like an early scientist, and also feasible with like limited instrumentation, right? Like we have pretty good instruments for a PY, but like we don't have like a bunch of Orbitraps sitting around and stuff like that, right? And so like we can't do a bunch of like high res or like top down kind of work, like that's just not feasible where I work, right? And so I have to choose projects that I think are doable for the students and for our lab. And honestly, like intellectually, that takes up a lot of my time and energy, because it's not always easy, right? To think about like what is good science that's publishable, but we can do it with a MALDI-TOF, or we can do it with like a linear ion trap, these are great instruments, but they're not like they're not like top of the line stuff, right? And so or we can do it across 4 different students who may overlap in my lab at different times, right? That I think a lot about that, and it is quite tricky, to be honest.
I think we're up to time. I have something really quick to share on that, like especially for undergrad that I work with a lot. I think I really want to spend a little bit of time of the day understand themselves, just their life outside the research, and just I think that really helped building the trust and with some group activity, because really undergrad their primary responsibility is passing their class, like, and then in the lab is their additional add-on to like for their future. So like if without really building the trust of them, and they would not come in willingly and produce the most amazing, like reach out their potential. So I really try to share my life with them and let them know I'm actually a human, I make mistakes, and so they have the trust with me, they will not hate me, so I can guide them. I think having fun with undergrad is quite important.
Hey, what a great way to end the seminar with that sentiment. I would just like to thank all of our speakers again. It was such an honor to have them here and share their experiences with mentorship on us. And I hope you all got a lot out of it today. I know I definitely did. And it was great to hear everything you had to say. And hope to see you guys at our next seminar.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
See you.